This makes it clear the entire inheritance goes to the eldest son. The will was genuine, so you can stop doubting it, you awful wife. Wow. Does that mean I get all of his money? My husband looks down on me while my daughter-in-law rejoices. I stare in despair at the will that states, I bequeath the entirety of my $10 million estate to my eldest son. Am I destined to lose everything and be stuck with this horrible man forever? But then, my brother said something that changed everything. My name is Emily. I'm a 55-year-old housewife. I live with my husband, Bob, and we don't have any children. In short, Bob is the epitome of a domineering spouse. From the beginning of our marriage, his word has been law, and I have never been able to oppose or voice my opinions to him. Being 10 years older than me, he has never shown any consideration for my feelings. Even though I devoted myself to him like a slave and worked tirelessly around the house, he would mercilessly berate me if anything displeased him. I was constantly blamed for our inability to have children and cried in secret almost every day. I wanted a divorce but didn't want to worry my family, and lacked the financial means to support myself. I endured living with Bob, who was arrogant and abusive, by gritting my teeth. The only support I had was my father. He was once a highly successful businessman. He built his company from the ground up and turned it into a large enterprise. Although he was a workaholic, he loved my brother and me in his own way. After my mother died in a car accident shortly after my wedding, he buried himself even more in work to escape the loneliness. The strain took its toll. My father suffered a stroke and was rushed to the hospital. Thankfully, his life was not in danger, but he was left with paralysis on his left side. As a result of his relentless hard work, my father's assets had become enormous. I persuaded my father to retire. Concerned about him living alone, I somehow convinced Bob to move in with my father. As soon as my workaholic father retired, he aged rapidly, showing signs of dementia, and soon became bedridden and in need of constant care. The physical and emotional burden on me increased drastically. In addition to my daily household chores and caring for Bob, I had to take care of my father, who had dementia. Sometimes my father would be calm, but other times he would scream and act out in the middle of the night, or wander outside. I couldn't take my eyes off him for a moment, leading to sleepless nights, immense stress, and endless hard work, leaving me constantly exhausted. My father was often in a fog, but there were moments when he was lucid. During those times, we could have peaceful conversations like we used to. He often thanked me and, with a sad smile, said, "At the very least, I want to leave you with a lot." Then my father passed away. It was 3 years after I had started caring for him. I was relieved of the burden of caregiving. But losing my only source of emotional support left me feeling an overwhelming sense of loss and loneliness. The only glimmer of hope was my father's inheritance. Even if the $10 million inheritance is split between my brother, James, and me, I'd still get $5 million. With that much money, I could finally leave my devil of a husband. It was my last hope for a better life. A few days later, Bob and my brother's wife, Jennifer, called me to discuss the inheritance. James has been working abroad on a solo assignment for a few years. He had come back for the funeral but returned to his post yesterday. Jennifer will attend as a representative of James. Your father's will was found in the back of a drawer. It's good we found it prepared. Since it wasn't sealed, let's read it now. A will. I don't recall anything about that. I had been caring for my father daily and never saw him write a will. Bob, who never even approached my father, how could he know about this? A sense of unease washed over me, filling me with dread. All right, I'll read it. I bequeath my entire estate to my eldest son, James. Date XX. Signed, Robert Johnson. That's it. I couldn't believe my ears. I had always thought my father's estate would be evenly divided between James and me. For the entire $10 million to go solely to him. Wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. Why? Bob shoved the will in my face. See for yourself. Sure enough, the will was signed by my father. I immediately suspected forgery. My father loved both James and me. He would never favor just one of us. Could my honest and kind-hearted brother really do something so selfish? While I was lost in suspicion, Jennifer chimed in excitedly. Wow. Is it really okay to get all of his dad's money? I feel kind of bad, but if that's what his dad wanted, we have to respect it. I couldn't accept this. As I silently held the will, Bob and Jennifer glared at me. Are you doubting this? Then get a handwriting analysis if you want. You're really terrible, you know. I'll just do that. I whispered, deciding to have the will analyzed. However, the result contradicted my expectations. The handwriting is undoubtedly that of the testator. I was shocked and fell into despair, reflecting on my past. My life had been dedicated to caring for Bob and my father. I had lived in fear of Bob's anger, hurt by his words, and called a worthless woman. But my last days with my father had been happy. I believed he cared about me. But now, the thought that he might have disregarded me was unbearable. I would have to leave the home and land I'd grown accustomed to, as they were part of my father's estate. The dream of divorcing Bob was now gone. Over the weekend, I told Bob about the results of the will analysis. He laughed at me condescendingly. This settles it, all the inheritance goes to James. Now stop your nonsense. The will was genuine, so you should be satisfied, you awful wife. He spat the words and left the house. Recently, he had been away from home more and more. He often came home late from work and was frequently absent on weekends. Although I felt suspicious, I was relieved to not have to face him. Despite Bob's orders, I wanted to speak directly with James about the inheritance. Though he was always busy with work abroad, James was kind and reliable. I arranged a call, mindful of his schedule. After brief greetings, James apologized again for leaving all the caregiving to me, and thanked me for handling the funeral and other procedures. Don't worry about it. By the way, about Dad's inheritance. Was it always decided that you'd get everything? I asked as casually as I could. The thought that my father might not have loved me was unbearable, but I needed to discuss it properly. What? The entire inheritance is left to me? He was shocked. I had assumed Jennifer had already told him, but it seemed this was the first he'd heard of it. The will was genuine, so I didn't expect the outcome to change. I explained everything to him. So, the handwriting on the will was Dad's, and that was all it said? All right, let me think about this for a bit. I'll get back to you. I'll also tell Jennifer not to proceed with any inheritance procedures until she hears from me. Saying that, he hung up. I was perplexed, but I waited for his response. A few days later, James contacted me. He advised me to have a private investigator look into Jennifer's suspicious behavior, and suggested I file a compulsory share claim against him. A compulsory share is the minimum portion of the estate legally guaranteed to the rightful heirs, which varies based on their relationship. In my case, I could claim $2.5 million of my father's $10 million estate. This meant that, even with a will stating the entire estate goes to James, I was entitled to $2.5 million. However, Bob and Jennifer fiercely opposed this. It's already decided, stop making a fuss now. But James had given me further advice. I'm not asking for $2.5 million. All I want is the house and land filled with memories of our father. That's only $1 million out of the $10 million estate. James can have the rest. Despite their continued objections, I pressed on. If things get more complicated, James suggested hiring a lawyer to join the discussions. In that case, I'll receive the full $2.5 million. Bob and Jennifer fell silent. Eventually, they realized it was more advantageous to settle for the $1 million in real estate. We finally reached an agreement on the inheritance distribution. A few days later, the private investigator reported on Jennifer's activities. I immediately contacted James. After various twists and turns, the inheritance procedures were completed without issues. James flew in from abroad for the proceedings. I inherited our father's house and the $1 million in real estate, while James received the remaining $9 million. Jennifer and Bob were pleased, thinking things had gone according to their plan. After leaving the notary's office, the four of us returned to my father's house. As we sat in the living room having coffee, James placed his phone on the table and began to speak. Everyone, great job. Now that the inheritance is settled, I have something to share. Smiling, he pulled a document from his pocket and spread it out on the table. Seeing the contents, Bob and Jennifer's faces froze. The document was titled Last Will and Testament. It was signed and sealed by my father. The date was about 5 years ago. This is the will my father entrusted to me while he was still working. It was created at the notary's office with 2 witnesses, making it legally binding. James explained that my father had prepared it himself before his stroke. After our mother's passing, he wanted to ensure his children were well taken care of, in case anything happened to him. The will stated that of his entire estate, James, who already has substantial assets, will receive 1/4. And the remaining 3/4 will go to Emily, a homemaker. My father said he has no intention of changing the contents of this will in the future, and he included the following statement in the will. If the contents of this will are to be changed, the reason for the change must be provided. Any will that does not include the reason for the change will be considered invalid. Dad worked himself to the bone and thought about the possibility of being incapacitated or having dementia. With such a large estate, he wanted to prevent any disputes among the family, so he prepared early. James gently touched the will. In the will's addendum, my father had written, "I hope the family can live in harmony and happiness without disputes over the inheritance." The will was filled with my father's warm feelings for his family. Realizing my father had loved me as much as James, I felt a surge of emotion. Meanwhile, Bob and Jennifer sitting next to me turned pale. So, without a valid reason attached, any changes to this will are void. Even if it's in Dad's handwriting? It's invalid if he was forced to write it while in a state of dementia. Suddenly, Bob slammed his hand on the table. Bob glared at James with a demonic expression and growled. "Hey, James, do you have any proof? Calling someone a criminal? I never said you forged the will, Bob. Jennifer, what do you think?" He looked at her sitting next to him. Jennifer didn't move. It puzzled me. After Jennifer informed me of our father's passing, I stayed in the US until the funeral was over. Then, after I returned overseas, the inheritance discussions began, but no one informed me about any of it, even though it directly involved me. James looked at her again. Jennifer still said nothing. "Shut up. The inheritance is settled. That $9 million is ours. Who cares now?" "Ours? What do you mean?" "I inherited it." I said shut up. Their conversation was going nowhere. "You see, the $9 million I inherited is worthless." "What?" James explained calmly. "Out of our father's $10 million estate, all non-real estate assets were stocks in his company. While my father was in charge, the company was prosperous, and the stock value was high. But after he retired, the company faced continuous losses and was on the brink of bankruptcy by the time he passed away. Once valued at over $9 million, the stocks were now virtually worthless. There's no way that's true." "It is. I knew this when I inherited it. I'm planning to handle the company's debt settlement. Since it didn't concern you, I didn't mention it." Bob was visibly shaken, mumbling to himself as he held his head. He couldn't grasp the reality. For the first time, Jennifer spoke up. "Wait a minute. Are you saying we inherited worthless stocks, and Emily got $1 million? That's unfair." James sighed beside the ranting Jennifer. "Jennifer, my father's inheritance was rightfully mine to inherit. You didn't lose anything. Why are you so angry? I thought we'd get the whole $10 million. I did so much." Jennifer's rambling was cut short by a sharp look from Bob. "You thought you'd get all of Dad's money, so you teamed up with Bob and also had an affair?" Jennifer and Bob fell silent, their faces frozen. "How?" Jennifer muttered, glancing at James. After our phone call, James began to suspect Jennifer. Why hadn't she informed him about the inheritance? Why had her interactions with him been distant and dismissive? Since he was suspicious about her, he checked her social media and confirmed his suspicions of an affair. "I'm about to come into a huge amount of money. Can't wait to discuss plans with my darling. We're going to have so much fun. I never had such a conversation with you." Who is a darling? It's not what you think, really. Jennifer stammered. Ignoring her, James pulled a large envelope from his bag. He took out several photos and laid them beside the will. The photos showed Jennifer and Bob entering a hotel together. The relationship between the two closely attached individuals was obvious. Since I was overseas, I hired a private investigator. I was curious about your darling. Jennifer trembled, confronted with undeniable evidence. While Jennifer turned pale, Bob's face flushed with anger. Stalking us, huh? What's your problem? With your fake will and these photos? This is... Wait. Jennifer suddenly screamed. In a sickeningly sweet voice, she sidled up to James. Hey, listen, you've got it all wrong. It's all Bob's doing. He told me that if I followed his plan, we'd get all of your father's inheritance. I was just following orders. Don't you think you'd be happy with $10 million? I did it for you. Bob, freshly betrayed, stared at Jennifer with his mouth agape. These pictures, they're just a little fun. I was lonely with you always being overseas. Isn't it partly your fault too? Please forgive me. Even if the $9 million is gone, we can still take the $1 million from Emily's real estate. Did you forge the will? Of course not. It was Bob. He said it was easy and had your father write it. See, I'm not at fault. Exposing the forgery, Bob lunged at Jennifer, but James quickly intervened. You scum. You have no proof. I'll make sure you regret this. You'll pay in the afterlife. As Bob ranted and kicked a chair, James calmly picked up his phone. Oh dear. It seems my phone accidentally went into recording mode. It looks like it recorded everything since I got back to this house. What a slip-up. Bob and Jennifer turned pale and fell silent. Also, I forgot to mention, there's a security camera in this room, recording everything. We installed it to monitor Dad's condition. Another coincidence. He continued talking as the living room fell silent. Forging a will is a serious crime. And your threats could be considered criminal intimidation. There's a police station nearby. And they'd come quickly if I called. But if you swear to leave Emily's inheritance alone, I might not need to report this. What do you think? As he said this, he was operating his phone, adding, I'll send this audio recording to my computer overseas for safekeeping. Having silently listened to their exchange until now, I took documents out of my bag and thrust them at Bob. Sign this divorce petition. Now. I placed the signed divorce petition, along with a pen on the table. Wait, let's think this through. I'm sorry. We've been together for so long. Who's been providing for you? I've had enough. Sign it now or I'll call the police. I held my phone with anger. Bob was defeated and signed it. Jennifer, we're finished. You planned to take the money and be with Bob once I got it, didn't you? I heard the records of your interactions with Bob from the detective agency. Jennifer slumped, covering her face. After that, both James and I divorced. After the divorce, Bob left the house. The inheritance he thought he had secured turned out to be worthless. And worse, Jennifer exposed his forgery of the will. And everything that happened in the living room was recorded. He must have been furious, but he was powerless against us. The surveillance camera in the living room was originally installed for my father's care. But it also served to gather evidence of Bob's abusive behavior. When I anticipated a conflict over the inheritance and Bob refusing the divorce, I planned to use the footage as evidence in the divorce court. When I told James about this, he suggested we make use of the camera as well. After the divorce, rumors of the affair spread at Bob's workplace, forcing him to resign. He was reportedly seen by colleagues entering and leaving a hotel with a relative who was not me. His parents had already passed away, and having lost both his home and job, he is now missing. I claimed no alimony, wanting nothing more to do with him, as I had my inheritance. Jennifer, like Bob, lost everything after that incident. During the divorce from James, Jennifer kept pleading, I don't want to break up. Don't abandon me. But irrefutable evidence was presented during mediation, and the divorce was finalized. Jennifer was also charged with alimony, but she had spent a lot of money while James was away, so she was charged for that as well, leaving her completely penniless. She never had a job, and like Bob, she has no home to return to, so now she lives in a run-down public housing unit, receiving welfare and barely getting by. James is still on his overseas assignment, but he put the house he lived in with Jennifer up for sale. And he moved in with me in the house our father left us. I had always lived modestly, but with James contributing to the household expenses, my life has become more stable. The land my father left has appreciated, now worth over $10 million. Free from caregiving and abuse, I now live peacefully. With my newfound free time, I decided to put my spacious home to use. Around that time, I saw a TV program about foreign students doing homestays and thought, this is it. So, I decided to start a room rental service for my vacant rooms. I began offering affordable rooms to college students and foreign students, and now I live happily and busily with them. We eat meals together, play games, and help each other with assignments. We live together like a big, happy family. On free days, I read stories to children at the local library. I had no children, and I felt distant from Bob. Moreover, I had always been anxious about how lonely I would be if I lost my beloved father. But now I am living unbelievably lively and vibrant days. Even at this age, connecting with young people and contributing to society, even just a little, brings me immense joy. There were many times when I wanted to run away from my life because of the hardships I faced. But now, I'm spending fulfilling days, gently connected with James, my housemates, and the local community. I savor the modest happiness I've finally attained every single day.